Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. The interests of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place. James Madison, Federalist number 51. Madison didn't trust centralized power, neither did the rest of the founders, so they built a system designed to frustrate it, splitting authority between federal, state, and local governments, between branches, between elected officials, and career administrators. The result was not efficient. It was never supposed to be. The result was resilient. That's not dysfunction, that's design. Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gord, the national security podcast that gives you a competitive advantage, an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world, looking for patterns and early warning signs, and asking how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's April 13th, 2026. Let's get to it. Hey, Sue, how are you?
Morning, Eric. I'm especially bouncy this morning. It's April 13th, and all my tax material is in the mail to my absolutely amazing, tolerant tax accountant. I'll still have to get an extension, but for me, in the 2-year journey I've been on since Jim passed away, to have to deal with one of the myriad things that amazing man took care of for the collective, I'm feeling super proud of myself this morning. So that's one.
Nice. Good for you.
And then two, I got an email from, as an LLC, I have a defined benefits plan that allows me to, do some 401k stuff. And we have to do that annually. And she sent me a note that said, Sue, did you work 1,000 hours last year? And I'm like, I don't know. What's 1,000 hours? So I used my LLM assistant and found out what 1,000 hours was. And I did, in between chemo and surgery and radiation and feeling sick and with the podcasts and the boards, I did. So, that's really cool to know that I actually worked when there were times when I thought, really, all I'm doing is lying in bed with my head stapled to my pillow. But mostly, I just have to reflect on the Artemis launch. And I will say, when it was kind of in the offing, I was like, well, yay, we've been to the moon before. I was there. It was the day before my 11th birthday when Neil Armstrong landed in the moon. How cool is this going to be? Oh my God. How cool was it? I was riveted to it. My basketball teammates who I watch basketball with were talking about it and in awe of it. Maybe it's a generational thing. Maybe it was really special. But relevant to us, I took a special note of Christina Koch in their first press conference after they landed, described what it means to be a crew in her comments. And she said, a crew is a group moving in the same direction, depending on each other completely, where everyone carries responsibility for everyone else. It's like a sports team where you learn to be dependent on and depend on others. And then she said something remarkable after seeing Earth from a lunar distance. And interesting, I know a lot of astronauts, and they're all saying the same thing, is when you go to space, your view of the Earth is entirely different. And that's a metaphysical view, not just a physical view. But what she said was, planet Earth, you're a crew. When you see the planet from that far away, you realize that there's no them, there's just us all riding the same ship through a very unforgiving universe, which got me thinking about something we talk a lot about here, this moment of global disruption and what we've been calling the Great Rewiring. And so the real question isn't just what we're against, it's what we're for and whether we still know how to act like a crew. I thought it was really compelling and touching. So, Eric, when you look at the signals we're seeing right now, did they look like the behavior of a crew or a ship where everyone's rowing in their own direction?
I think we have a lot of people rowing in their own direction. I would like to row in a different direction and not submit my taxes at all, but I'm almost there. Good for you for getting them in. No, I think the Artemis launch captivated the nation, right? And I don't think it was just from a distraction standpoint that we wanted to look at something or talk about something different than the Iran war or inflation or what's going on with the economy. I think it reminds us that there are bigger things than some of these petty issues and bigger things than ourselves, and how amazing and incredible it is to take four people and slingshot them around the moon and what it builds in the years to come, right? We talked a little bit before about lunar basing and what are we trying to accomplish by that. And we
Yeah.
still need a little bit more fidelity there. But I think it's an inspiration to everyone, just like it was a couple days before your 11th birthday. I think that still rings true here in 2026.
Yeah, did you know this is so cool that they carried on board a little teeny tiny piece of canvas from the Wright brothers' plane? I'm gonna cry. And a piece of the Challenger and a piece of the Columbia. And there was this, I don't know who said it, but what they said, so the Artemis launch showed that the Wright brothers flew higher than they ever dreamed, and the Challenger made it to space, and the Columbia got home safely.
Wow.
I know. There's goodness. I'm telling you, it's a hard place right now, but there's goodness.
Yeah. What else are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, so for the past year, and especially we really codified it last episode, we've been talking about the great rewiring of the world order, not collapsing per se, but making different choices than the ones that have dominated kind of global interaction geopolitics in the post-World War II era. And that's the outside story of America that we've been talking about. So today we're going to talk about the inside story. And you mentioned it in the cold open, is one of the least appreciated features of the American system is how much power lives outside of Washington. We're not a centralized system. It's a distributed system of states and local governments and authorities. The design creates friction and also resilience. We're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about elections and then governors and what the states are doing with one piece of national infrastructure. So I think it'll be a great episode for us.
Well, let's get into it. So every 2 or 4 years, depending, the American election system is described as if it were one thing, the election. One process, one outcome, one system to trust or distrust. But that's a little misleading. There's no single American election system. There are thousands of them, each run by local officials, governed by state law, and administered at the county level. There are roughly 8,000 to 10,000 election jurisdictions across the United States. Each state sets its own rules for voter registration, ballot design, early voting, mail-in voting, poll hours, ID requirements, and how ballots are counted. Counties purchase and maintain their own equipment. Local election boards certify results, and secretaries of state oversee processes. And the federal government's role is relatively narrow. The Election Assistance Commission provides guidance and funding. Department of Justice enforces voting rights law, and CISA offers cybersecurity support. But no federal agency runs an election. It was a deliberate design choice rooted in the same distrust of concentrated power that animated the entire constitutional structure. And it creates a system that is, by its nature, extremely difficult to hack at scale. We've tracked election integrity on the show before in episode 35. Today, we're talking why the system is built this way and why that matters. So, Sue, you've worked inside systems designed to prevent single points of failure before across the intelligence community networks and in the defense architecture. But when you look at how American elections are actually administered with 10,000 independent jurisdictions, different rules, different technology, does that architecture serve as a weakness or a strength here?
What a great question. I'm going to say it is unequivocally a strength, even though it's under assault for lots of different reasons, just growth, digital world, all those sorts of things. I think there are just brilliant things about that distribution. And we talk about it all the time. Local jurisdictions are where we have the most trust. It's where we have our greatest sense of community. It's where we're most like each other. You know, you take your family every year to go vote. I do too. And no matter where I go and vote, that process of standing in line with people who are going to vote differently from you, right? All these differences we're seeing are all in that one place at a time. I find we still believe in it, and it is an amazing sense of community. There is absolutely no discussion in those lines. that I've ever had. I mean, sometimes you'll talk about the candidates, but it really is about what we want, looking at the bonds, looking at the things, do we think it's right? Do we share? So I think it's unequivocally a good system. I have 2 data points that I really like about it. Number 1 is, this is so funny. If you look at all our infrastructure right now, when we talk about energy, I'm gonna say the same thing. Now we're in a world where our adversaries can act digitally to extend their reach to get to us without having to be physically present. And cyber is real and cyber is problematic, but I will say our distributed systems by and large are, I don't know if we design them to be resilient, but there is a resilience to them because they are built differently, don't universally touch each other the same way. And so it is really hard for adversaries to have systemic effects against the election infrastructure itself. I don't think we designed it for that reason, but it certainly has that benefit. And then the second thing I love about it, and I've talked about one of my dearest friends who I played basketball with. She lives in North Carolina, and she is as passionate about America as I am. She may get madder about it than I do sometimes, but man, she's passionate. And a few years ago, as she was retiring, she decided she was going to pick up work in local elections. Here are 2 observations that I get from her. Number 1 is, and I'm reflecting, not quoting her. Number 1 is, oh my God, it is so much work. The amount of work that volunteer election officials put into making sure that elections are run well and fairly and systemically and effectively and thoughtfully within the rules is absolutely unbelievable. Really and truly. As we're leading into any election system, if you say, "Hey, can you come to a basketball game with me?" She's like, "Nah, working the elections." So
Yeah.
this idea of how much work and commitment it takes from citizens to protect and effect this infrastructure is, in fact, to me, one of the great reflections of the persistence of our democracy, even though it's showing its wear and tear. So one is, huzzah to all the citizens who volunteer to make this work, and they do, and it's real work for great purpose. And the pride that comes with it and how devoted they are to their citizens is really awesome, and again, a feature of the system. The second thing that I think comes away from that is, I think all of us who sit on the outside, and even some who sit on the inside, can be really skeptical when you're bombarded with people telling you that there's corruption everywhere. From my friend who works, the trust in the system is almost profounder in her than it is in me because of how tactile it is at that moment of election. So I'm going to say strength all the way. Now, the weakness thing comes in from a disrupted world where, boy, information disorder is profound. More rules are being laid on localities. People don't always know how they're going to meet the rules. The SAVE Act,
Yeah.
no matter what you feel about the intention of it, boy, just trying to put that lateness into this world so that every single citizen can get the best chance they have to meet the requirements to do what is most fundamentally American. Boy, I think that's tough. Now, if we had a more streamlined system that was more universal, could everything be more simply affected? Maybe. But I think that is one of the areas of frictions that we have. So I love the system. I love the Americans that still believe. I love the trust that comes from that. And I love the commitment to who we are that inspires them to do that. But I will say, in a world of information disorder and how fast things move, you can have people who are ill-informed or misinformed landing in a system at the wrong time and wrong place to create chaos.
What I was a little surprised at the number. I guess it makes sense. 8,000 to 10,000. Like, that's a lot of individual concern for silos, right? But you do have everybody rowing in the same direction through CISA and through the FBI and through the Election Assistance Commission,
Right.
looking for the same outcome in terms of free and fair elections. But how you get there, I think giving that autonomy up to the states and localities is more impactful.
I will say, though, on the That's Sue the positive. This is Sue the negative. My friend Mark Warner, senior senator from Virginia, vice chairman of the Senate Select Committee of Intelligence. Mark's been in intelligence for a long time. I've known him forever. He just wrote a guest essay for the New York Times that is, I say scary because he argues that Donald Trump and his allies are laying the groundwork to challenge or overturn the 2026 election results by invoking supposed intelligence about foreign interference. So not stealing Mark's thesis one way or another, but I think there is some believability to what you could imagine as part of this nationalization push that this administration kind of seems to be pushing. We want national control over our election infrastructure, using national security and foreign interference as they have done on some other areas where they wanted it to be not questioned as a matter of, well, we have to do it because it's national security. I think it's worth attending to. And Warner's concern is that intelligence that's normally used to inform and protect the democratic process could be selectively cited
Hmm.
or exaggerated or mischaracterized to justify extraordinary actions like delaying certification or contesting results. And his core warning is that intelligence assessments are inherently complex and probabilistic, which is why they focus on what our adversaries are doing. They're not determinative of what's happened here. I will not reopen the 2016 ICA, but I could. What he's pointing to is the very tools that were meant to safeguard democracy could be weaponized to undermine it. And he just makes those 3 points. Number one, that intelligence is probabilistic, that courts are not designed to operate at political speed. So far, our courts have been where we adjudicate these things. You remember that in the 2020 election. You're seeing it going on with the seizure of the records from Georgia. And so the courts are looking at things and saying, well, that's not according to Hoyles, or overturning some of the decisions. I don't think we can count on courts to stop anything that's improper because they work through procedure and evidence and appeals, which takes time. If you were to challenge and throw some intelligence, national security reason down on the day of an election and call it into question at speed, you could have real havoc. The last thing that we've talked about forever that I was struck with Mark's article was the real target is not the elections, but trust. It's not the vote itself, but it's trust. And we've talked about not only does that support foreign narratives that love to undermine democracy, but it's not really helpful for us building the thing. So while I love the strengths of it, what we're seeing in so many of our systems is that people who don't like the outcome of the systems are trying to question the validity of the system. And this is one of the really insidious ways that I think it can be done, is to throw our most profound tool, which is intelligence, at something that is not designed for that use.
Yeah. That's a bummer because Senator Warner never really struck me as a clickbaity kind of guy
He
or
is not.
somebody
He is
crying
not.
wolf. He is running for re-election in 2026.
I've known him for a long time, and, this is funny, Eric. What I loved about being an intelligence officer was because it really was without agenda, and I hope if I've done nothing else when I've been talking more since my career, is that to say, intelligence and I try and be anti-political. It just is what is. And so most other people have an agenda. People running for elected office are trying to represent something, that thing they represent, they want to represent and have happen. But like you, Eric, I have not found Senator Warner to be incredibly hyper-partisan on this. He has a point of view, but one of the reasons why the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence has always been one of the bastions of real bipartisanship has been that in this domain, the actors tended to be about security more than they were about the agenda, and the agenda was bigger. I'm not endorsing one way or another because I've done none of that work,
Sure.
but it does fit with a pattern we have seen and we've talked about on our podcast of, because national security, until understandable insights came along and we demystified it all, national security seemed like something secretive and special that only 7 people could know, and I could cite it and you would have to give into it. Boy, that would not be a good thing to throw into an already fraught election cycle.
That's a good point. Well, let's talk about the governors a little bit. And when we talk about executive power in this country, the conversation almost always starts and ends with the president. But there are 50 other executives in the system, each with independent constitutional authority. Governors command their state national guards. They set enforcement priorities on immigration, deciding how, whether, and when state law enforcement cooperates with federal agencies. They drive economic development, recruiting companies, negotiating incentives, directing infrastructure spending, and they make public health decisions. And increasingly, they act as counterweights to federal policy. We've seen this dynamic play out vividly in 2026. Governor Abbott in Texas is continuing to deploy the National Guard to the border under state authority, operating independently of and at times in direct tension with federal operations. Governor Newsom in California has positioned the state as a regulatory counterweight on environmental standards, AI governance, and immigration sanctuary policies. And according to the National Conference of State Legislatures, NCSL, all 50 states, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands and Washington, D.C., introduced some form of legislation on AI during their 2025 legislative sessions. 38 states adopted or enacted around 100 measures in 2025. Last week, we talked about the AI legislative framework and state preemption, the federal government telling states they can't regulate AI. Now we're seeing some of that direct tension as we talk about it further. So, the governors are independent executives with real power. Their independence creates friction within Washington, but it also prevents any single administration from controlling the entire apparatus of government.
Our founder's vision had so many brilliant elements to it. Like I said, the tension between democracy and capitalism, and how you get tension within our democracy, and that's part the states and the federalism that we're talking about. And I think governors are a really good place to start. You're seeing in this environment where there's a lot of contention about this power of the federal government, is it consistent with our values? Can they do that? Is there the constitutional authority? You're seeing some of the real voices of not just resistance to the breakage, but actually the replacement with something that might work better in our governors. Ways to think of it is governors aren't middle managers for Washington. They're sovereign actors inside the system with real power. And to the first conversation we had on elections, this is where we have trust and where we have community. It's big enough to make a difference. That said, to your point about my friend Senator Warner, they all are within a system with their views too. And there's no magic bullet that just because you became a governor that you got to be a good governor. But I like it. I think there's real power. Listen, Governor Newsom in California changed the course of mid-cycle gerrymandering by standing up. I have to argue that Governor Pritzker changed the course of some of the ICE actions and the National Guard deployment by standing up and speaking out. Governor Shapiro, Governor Spanberger. So I think there's no doubt that Governor DeSantis has impact from what he does in Florida. So I think there's something really exciting to be built on here. I think if you look at the governors' conventions that are held, there's a bipartisanship there because of the commonality of the challenges of providing actual service to their constituents that makes them be, in some ways, super practical and a bit more resilient. We have talked about state and local being the place where we might see innovation because the federal government is almost too big to innovate. And the way we innovate there is by adding things and spending more money. I think governors might be our transportation to new ideas about how to do this brilliant vision that we were gifted almost 250 years ago.
Yeah, and they also filled in some of the vacuum. We talked about the end of last year with the COP30 in Brazil. We had not just Governor Newsom, but Tony Evers of Wisconsin
Right.
and Michelle Lujan Grisham of New Mexico going down there. And I think it's also important to note that 19 of our former presidents were prior governors. So 19 out of 45,
Yep.
about 42%.
I didn't know that. About 19 presidents were former governors. You will agree with me that the moment we're at right now is we have to decide what we're for. We have to decide what we need, and then we actually have to put that into effect. And I think there's some natural advantages that governors have in being able to do that at scale. especially the authorities that they have as I say, sovereigns within a system.
Well, we also recently discussed the Ratepayer Protection Pledge and the AI Legislative Framework infrastructure provisions, those being federal level signals and the real action on energy policy happening at the state level, as it always has. So, we're going to look at regions with independent grid operators like ERCOT in Texas, or also in California, state level decisions directly shaping grid reliability, pricing, and resilience. And those decisions have national and global consequences. So we talked about this one before. California's Advanced Clean Cars 2 rule was aimed at 100% zero emission new vehicle sales by 2035. Well, that caused the automakers to need to develop a common configuration of vehicles. And so when the legislation was adopted by 11 other states, that caused the automakers to jump forward and make sure that those vehicles all met the same standards. There's a federal waiver now that's contested under the Trump administration, so leaving the long-term effect on the auto industry relatively uncertain, but it's indicative of when one state makes a move in a certain direction, how it can cause
Yeah.
ripple effects throughout the nation. And then the connection to the AI infrastructure debate is direct. Data centers consume enormous amounts of power and electricity. When they get built, how they connect to the grid, what power sources they use, and who pays for the upgrades. All of that's primarily governed at the state level. The federal government can set incentives and make pledges, but the governors and utility commissions decide what gets built and what gets powered. So when we talk about energy as a national security issue, we tend to think federally, but the grid is regulated at the state. Contrast that with election segment we just did. Does the distributed nature of energy governance strengthen or weaken our national security posture?
So weirdly, there are some elements of this that serve the individual just as well as our election infrastructure does in terms of trust and commonality and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not sure that it serves the collective as well as our election infrastructure does. And the reason is, as I say, with elections, when we put that system in place, we knew what we were trying to achieve as a collective. With energy, I don't know that we have a view of what the collective outcome is. And so I worry that you're going to have haves and have nots. You're going to have advances that work in one region that, as you say, in the cars turns into put pressure on an industry that didn't expect to be pressured that way. You have wealthy localities that are well served, but may not consider the whole ecosystem about if the tankers aren't getting here with the oil, are you going to be able to run the power in order to deliver the system? So I think the distributed nature and the independence of this, including even of AI, right, makes sense from an individual perspective. I'm locally optimizing for what I need, for what my climate is, for what the environment is. But I'm not sure that it makes us as secure because I don't think those things are tethered to a common vision of the standards that you must keep and make in order to make sure that in every locality you're able to provide power in this condition for this amount of time to this many people. Right. And if you can't say that, then how do you ever scale it either up or down without threatening those things? So and then throw privatization on top of it. Who pays? Who's responsible? Really plays out in this. So energy, huge element of our infrastructure and of national security. Right now, no way to be effective at delivering it if it isn't distributed. But I think it creates a much bigger vulnerability than we're really assuming if we ever have national crises. The AI piece just adds a whole different component to it. The power is certainly one aspect of it, but there are other elements of intellectual energy, how it's shared, how it's assured, that again, the distributed approach or a centralized approach, if they're not coordinated, I think are problematic. So this is one that bears watching. There are a lot of things going into it. We've recognized how fragile it is. I don't know that we have thought systemically about what must be assured, what must be common, and what can be locally optimized because there's advantage in local optimization too. Good thing we have those governors that we just put up on pedestals to figure this out.
For sure. I'm reminded of a book I was reading with the boys called Locomotive, and they start out on this journey of westward expansion with a steam train powered by coal. And then when they get halfway across the country, they transition to a wood burning train just because of the resources that were
Right.
readily available. And so I don't know how many solar panels they have up in the Pacific
Right.
Northwest and in Seattle compared to West Texas and desert landscapes where your sun availability is a lot more prevalent. It just makes sense to me that you're going to be more
Has
regionally focused because of the resources that you have.
How do you also act as a nation when adversaries and competitors and just nature, as we talk about, can knock you out if the local choices weren't made with the biggest perspective? And again, it's what we talk about here all the time is national security decision makers are increasingly not inside the federal government. How do we make sure that they have the perspective and the framework that allows the decision making they need to locally optimize while still ensuring that we can in fact act as a system with the protections that our citizens expect?
So, of these three stories we've talked about, elections, governors, and energy, they all look a little bit different on the surface, but they share that same structural principle of power in the American system is deliberately distributed. What do you want folks to remember from this episode or not walk away misunderstanding besides that?
I love the distributor model. I think it's the only way it works. Again, there are just moments when I think about how that group of farmers and landowners came together and came up with this idea. And not because they were just idealistic, they decided they wanted to rebel against their overlords, how they came up with our system. And it has features, and one of them is this distributed feature that I think has some great things about it. As we have grown, and as the world has become more digital and how everyone can get whatever they can get, we have to address it because there's a myopia involved in it. Kind of the crew point is, yes, I do have a locality, but whether it's the tyranny of the commons or other things, we are all floating on this marble out in a very hostile environment. We got to consider each other. And so I think what we're seeing now, I like the distributed nature. I would like some reimagining of how the federal government interacts with it. I don't like what's happening where that distributed system is being manipulated by a political party that has a view that affects what they do for their people. And that, again, isn't a single party. That's whoever happens to be in control. I liked it a whole lot more when you had non-straight line party votes, which felt to me more will of the people-y than we have now. I think American government was designed to be harder to control than most people realize. It's why I hate escalation of government privilege, whether in big bureaucracy or in one person who thinks that they alone can fix it, because neither of those are true. They have to work in tension. And so we need some rewiring inside just as we need rewiring outside, but it doesn't mean that the thesis behind either of those was wrong. It just means that the world has changed and we've got to adapt with it without losing who we are or forgetting what we need.
Well, in terms of what we're watching, give you a break here. I'm watching elections in Hungary.
Woof.
Orban just lost the election. Pretty overwhelming majority for the new leader being elected in Hungary's presidency. So, pretty interesting one there. See what that spells for the rest of Europe and specifically the U.S. Hungary relationship.
Yeah.
And then also, Associated Press is reporting the ceasefire talks with Iran without an agreement on April 12th, and the U.S. says it will begin a blockade affecting Iranian ports via the Strait of Hormuz today, Monday, April 13th.
Yeah, well, one, I like both those. I love watching what happens with the Orban defeat because there was a huge wave, I don't know, starting in 2016 of kind of populism in elections, kind of a right-wing movement globally, not just here, but globally. I wonder what the signal in the Orban thing is. Is it
Yep.
that Hungary got dissatisfied, or is it seeing that our systems really do work in tension? If you go too far in one direction, you go back the other. I gotta talk about this blockade for a second. So this is actually the second time, and it's not this blockade, but it is related to it. This is the second time that President Trump has said things that make me kinda have an RCA dog moment, like, "What?" The first was, golly, right at the beginning of this second term, he was in an interview, and someone asked him about China cyber activity that was stealing our intellectual property, and the president said, "Oh, we all do that." And I'm like, "No." No, we don't. That isn't. There are laws and norms and stuff that govern even intelligence activities, and one of those is we don't go into private companies and steal their intellectual property for the self-aggrandizement of ours. I mean, it just isn't done. But the second was when someone floated the idea that Iran was going to set up a toll booth in the Strait of Hormuz, and the president said, "Well, maybe we'll make it a joint venture." And I was like, "What?" So, I just have to say, historically, the United States has been the country that shows up to keep the sea lanes open, not to close them. And forever, when North African states tried to charge tribute for ships to pass through the Mediterranean in the early 1800s, the United States didn't pay. We fought a war over it. So when I hear talk about restricting navigation or charging for passage, my first reaction is, well, that's weird. Because that would mean that America is switching sides in a 250-year-old argument about the oceans. Not to mention our two other values, which are kind of freedom of commerce and freedom of sovereignty. So I would say that when I heard it, I'm like, well, that's not a policy tweak. That's a strategic signal, and I'm not sure I like it. I'll say the other thing I'm watching this week is a small labor story that appeared in NPR. And this story reported that most of the new jobs created recently have gone to women, largely because the fastest growing sectors right now are healthcare service and caregiving. And there were some other points in the article about we need to get men more to work. But sometimes people hear that and think, well, those aren't the real performance sectors, which is odd because those are the sectors that actually keep societies functioning. Meanwhile, women are also showing up everywhere else in medicine and science and intelligence and technology and apparently being an astronaut. And women can now earn the majority of college degrees in the United States. So the issue isn't capability. The issue is whether we're serious about meritocracy. I'm thinking about starting when I get to a new venue saying things like this. Hi, I'm Sue Gordon, 40 years in national security, and I'm a woman. Turns out that women can do national security. I checked. So a quick shout out to my friend Lauren Brito at Girls Security. Lauren, don't you dare change that name. Because here's the bottom line. Ignoring half the talent pool isn't meritocracy. It's malpractice. That's what I'm watching.
All right. Well, that's what we're watching and how we see it. Thank you for joining us, and no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, or government, but in its people.
So thanks for joining us. We'd love to hear what you think about our direction, our focus, and our insights. It's a conversation we want. Tell us how we can better serve you. And join us next week and each week for the Understandable Insights podcast, wherever you listen. And as always, go forth, do good, and for goodness sakes, be kind to one another. It makes all the difference.